It's Dr. Vic again here at the Third Space, and today I'm talking about pigs again, but honestly it's the last one, so don't worry if you're sick of me banging on about pigs and bacon. I just wanted to sort of summarise some of my work that I did about pigs in ancient times, and how they're really important for women. And I'm going to explain that in today's video. So imagine an animal so powerful that it nourished your body, it protected your harvest by nuzzling around with its nose in the fields, it recycled all your old waste, and it also connected you to the divine, and that animal was the pig. So before becoming a symbol that represented dirt, uncleanliness, taboo, pigs stood at the heart of rituals, of fertility, magic, and these rituals were often led by women. So today, pork remains forbidden, something that Jewish and Muslim people can't eat. But few of us really ask how sacred a creature it was, and how it was transformed into that symbol of pollution that we know from the Bible and from today's society. So this is the story of pigs, power, and the struggle over who gets to define the sacred. In the Neolithic and Bronze Age, Near East, pigs were not merely livestock, they were embodiments of life itself. Their rapid reproduction, large litters, like up to 12 piglets at a time, an ability to thrive alongside humans made them living emblems of abundance and fertility. Archaeological finds from sites like, let me just get the pronunciation right, Çatalhöyük and Hacılar in what is now modern Turkey, but back then Anatolia. They include figurines in Hacılar, drinking vessels in the shape of pigs, and in Çatalhöyük, pig statues associated with the mother goddess. These were all household shrines and often associated with female figures and deities. They weren't children's toys, they were ritual objects, invoking the pig's power of fecundity, renewal, and abundance. So in ancient texts and later folklore, they also associate pigs with magic. So pig blood appears in healing charms, pig fat in protective ointments. Even in the Bible, in the book of Isaiah, there are references to particular spells that were performed in ancient times to invoke the presence of dead patriarchs. So some Mesopotamian incantations describe pigs as liminal animals, able to cross the boundaries between human and divine. They were important creatures. The sow especially symbolised maternal abundance. These connections, they place pigs firmly within a female sphere of sacred power, the power to give life, to heal, and to move between worlds. Women were often the custodians of this magic. In household cults, female ritual leaders offered piglets or pig-shaped breads to goddesses such as Inanna, Ishtar, Astarte, Asherah, and in ancient Egypt, Nut, who was depicted as a sow, and she was essentially the mother of the universe, and Osiris, who was probably the most important god of Egypt, annually was offered pig sacrifices, and everybody made bread cakes made in the shape of pigs. So the pig was not simply an animal, it was a ritual partner sustaining the cyclical rhythms of birth, death, and renewal. But by the first millennium BCE, the religious landscape of the Levant was changing. Israelite religion was moving towards an exclusive worship of Yahweh, who was obviously a male god. He was obviously as well increasingly defined by his transcendence and his masculinity, and the ability of a male masculine god to give birth to the universe and people and everything in it. So this shift wasn't merely theological, it was also political. Centralising worship in Jerusalem, as demanded in Deuteronomy, required dismantling local shrines and these kind of female-led rituals that flourished there in ancient Canaan. In these contexts, the pig's fate became a battleground for this kind of transformational process of this transition from a multi-god religion and set of spiritual values towards one male god. And it ties to earth, blood, female fertility. All of those things were made and reconstructed as a threat to this new order that prized separation from the natural world and control over women's rituals, roles, and their status in society. By labelling the pig unclean, priestly elites didn't just simply issue a dietary rule, they performed a cultural coup. They took an animal that embodied female generative power and recast it as dangerous and polluting. So they weren't just recasting pigs as dangerous and polluting, they were trying to move away from feminine power. So Mary Douglas, who was an important author in this kind of sphere of discussions, she famously argued that purity laws are about maintaining boundaries. So the pig, with its cloven hoof but lack of cud chewing, literally breaks the categories of the biblical purity system. So this was not only about symbolic tidiness, it was about who held the power to name the sacred. Rejecting the pig meant rejecting the older female-centered cosmologies in which pigs and women together mediated this fertility of the lands, fertility in their own human bodies, and the capacity to perform transformative magic. So there are a couple of books in the Bible, specifically Leviticus and Deuteronomy, that talk about the reasons why pork is forbidden. So the specific quote is that the pig has a split hoof but doesn't chew the cud, it is unclean for you. So traditional explanations about why it was unclean come in two different camps. So one in terms of the practicality that pigs carry certain parasites and viruses, that they need specific types of shade and water and mud, resources that are often scarce in the ancient Levant. So it made them unsustainable. Other suggestions are that they just went out of favour, and chickens were kind of the favoured food source of the age, so it was just a simple sort of lack of favour for pigs and their rearing that was more expensive, so it made ecological common sense to move away from them. Another explanation that's often cited in this kind of context is Mary Douglas's suggestion that pigs were rejected because they blur categories that threatened ritual order. So both of these explanations capture part of the story, but they miss the deeper politics of the issue. As biblical scholar Julia Ryder emphasises, the dietary prohibitions in Leviticus are best read as part of a broader programme of covenantal identity and centralised worship. By prescribing which animals could be eaten or sacrificed, Levitical law drew sharp boundaries around Israel's community and reinforced the authority of the Jerusalem temple. So according to Ryder, these laws create and maintain the distinct identity of the people of Israel and ensure that the central sanctuary remains the focal point of purity and divine presence. Archaeological surveys support this reading, so pig bones are abundant in Philistine and Canaanite sites, but scarce in Israelite contexts in the Iron Age onwards. And they almost vanish entirely when the biblical King Josiah took over, reinforcing these kind of Davidic rules. And to eat pig was to align with the Philistines, or later the Greeks and the Romans, and to reject pork was to declare allegiance to Yahweh and that central, extremely masculine cult that was emerging in ancient Israel. So food became theology and diet became destiny. So the pig's demonization also reinforced this kind of gendered hierarchy by stripping away the sacred status of pigs, of this animal that's tied to female fecundity, fertility. The Israelite elites undermined women's ritual authority. So that household magic that women used to be participants and leaders of, that was once the domain of these mothers and grandmothers, it was recast as dangerous and superstitious. So think about all the times that women have been framed as witches. Back in those days, it was exactly the same. So we're looking at kind of 4,000 to 3,000 years ago. These kinds of attitudes were just forming. So priestly men claimed exclusive control over sacrifice and purity, positioning themselves as the sole mediators between God and the people, which honestly, if we think about it, doesn't make an awful lot of sense. So we've got a male God and also these kind of male practitioners on earth. What would make more sense would have been sort of a male God with women having the power and the authority to exclusively mediate between earth and the spiritual realm. But this is just the way things went. So even in early Christianity, where Jesus declares all foods are clean, that stigma persisted in the specific gospel stories. So of the Gerasene exorcism, where demons flee into herds of pigs and then they plunge into the sea. So it remained a vessel of chaos and evil, an echo of its earlier fall from sacred to profane. So today, pork taboos in Judaism and Islam still carry these kind of ancient resonances. They're not merely about hygiene, about pigs being particularly smelly or dirty. It's not about that, or about the taste. It is about identity and power. And to keep kosher or halal is to participate in a 3,000-year-old story of belonging and boundary. So recognizing that the pig was once sacred invites us to question other natural categories. If something once divine can be recast as dirty, what does that tell us about how power operates over animals, over women, and over the very idea of purity? These ancient food laws remind us that religion is not only about God, it's about the social order that we build and construct, the bodies that we control, and the stories that we tell to make those controls seem eternal. So the next time someone says, oh, pigs are so smelly and dirty, remember that they were once magical, they were maternal, they were a conduit to the spirit, and they were part of our feminine toolkit of our magical power in ancient contexts. So the pig's journey from sacred to forbidden is not just a curiosity of the past. It's a lesson in how power rewrites the meaning of life itself. And I'd just like us to sort of remember that when we're thinking about pigs, that pigs are, despite the fact that they rummage around often in big piles of poo, only because they're not cleaned out properly. It's to do with the power of pigs. If we really think about it, the way that they're hidden away from society, we never see pigs wandering around in fields. They're treated more barbarically than any other animal on the planet in intensive farming systems, but they were once sacred. They were once our totem animal. So be kind to piggies. Bye.